Well, hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Barriers and Boundaries Resilience Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, DB. I got a longtime friend with me today, Matthew Allison. What's going on, Matthew?
Hey, what's up? Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Matthew's story is one that, as you can probably see in the title of the episode, Matthew has been to every country in the world. So, wow. That's definitely not something that you hear every day or see every day. But I just wanted to capture that just because of the journey, the stories, endless. I'm sure we could talk hours, but when you say every country, you mean every single country.
All 193 United Nations recognized sovereign countries. But beyond that, I've been to every continent, including Antarctica, and dozens more of countries that aren't recognized by other countries. Ones that are sort of like independent, like breakaway republic type countries.
To have a goal like that is one where this is barriers and boundaries. Like you're going to, I imagine, have barriers to your vision, your goal of doing that. And then there's obviously certain boundaries you need to put in place to have that as well. What are some of your favorite places that you've traveled to?
Some of my favorite countries are experiences where going to places that really kind of push the envelope of everything that I am used to, all of the norms that I'm accustomed to, culturally, comfort wise. I just like to go to places that just kind of blow your sensations away, whether it be like living with tribes. Some of my favorite experiences were staying with tribes. Like I
Mm.
went to the Yamal Peninsula in the Siberian Arctic of Russia in winter. And I stayed with these reindeer herders called the Nennet people. And that was about 10 plus years ago, maybe 12 years ago. And it was one of the most uncomfortable and scariest trips that I've ever had. But one of my favorite nonetheless, because it was as different as you can get on this planet, as exotic and far away as you can possibly go. And these people, they speak Russian, they speak their own Nenetsky language. So it was very difficult to communicate with them. And I lived with them in they have these teepees made out of reindeer hide. I lived with them in the winter and just kind of immersed myself in their way of life, as difficult as it was in the freezing cold, for about a week or so, and I'll never forget that experience. And it was terrifying because it was literally 50, 60 below zero.
Tundra
Not
everywhere. Like,
not a village or a settlement for hundreds of miles from their little teepee encampment. And they don't they don't use heat to heat up the teepee at nighttime. They only use it for cooking. So when you're sleeping at night, you're sleeping in the cold. So you wrap yourself in these reindeer hide blankets. And also I brought my sleeping bag. And even with all of that, I would still wake up just freezing, my toes numb,
oof.
just breathing in that cold air, which you have to warm up in your lungs. You just feel the crackling of that all night long, and it was painful, and it was scary.
How do you decide where you go? Oh, I'm gonna go hang out with this, reindeer tribe in the in the Arctic. Um, I know getting to, let's say, every country or every continent and all that stuff is one thing, but to pick a place like that, because I'm sure you could have stepped foot in a country somewhere else where it was a little bit more enjoyable.
Well, the truth is, my goal was not to get to every country in the world. My goal is really to have experiences all over the world, unique
Mm.
experiences with cultures, tribes, seeing rare and endangered wildlife, and climbing mountains, going to rainforests, things like that. And then over the course of my travels, that sort of brought me to over 100 countries. And I realized, you know what, I can actually get to every country in the world too. So why not make that a goal as well? And I never in the beginning actually thought that was something even attainable, for someone like me,
Hmm.
who grew up without a lot of money and, you know, who didn't have access to a lot of money. I never thought in a million years I could get to every country in the world. So it wasn't really a goal in the beginning. And it wasn't
Mm.
until later on, decades into my travels, that I realized that it's actually something I can do. And, but my main motivation is really to have experiences like going out to stay with the Nenet people, or I've been to Russia 4 or 5 times in different areas of Russia,
Wow.
hiking Siberian tigers in the Far East, um, kayaking down a river with grizzly bears in Kamchatka, and also the Siberian part, and taking a train. I don't know, like I love Russia. It's one of my favorite countries. I could go on about different experiences.
I know you've traveled with some of our friends, with Tim, Eric, John, some of those guys. Is that always by design? You want somebody to go with you? You try to go by yourself in some of these places intentionally, or is it just a matter of scheduling and
So
logistics?
I think, like all things in life, you appreciate them more, I think, when you have someone to share those experiences with, like a friend or family. And I don't know, there's so many experiences that are just richer when you can share them, I think. And traveling is something that's very passionate to me. And if I can share that with my friends and family, I'll do it every time. But a lot of times I can't find anyone to go with me. It's been a lot easier in the last few years, but in years past, if I couldn't find someone to go with me, I would go alone. Um, you know, if I were to wait for others, I would never go anywhere. And I do like traveling alone too, because you can see what you want to see on your own terms, and there's no limitations. And but I also really like traveling with friends and family. And
Yeah.
it's cheaper
And
to share the cost.
and now you have Paula and Indy, a built-in travel team
Yeah,
to kind of go with that. Um,
it's a different kind of travel, right? But I mean, it's still some of my favorite travels are with my daughter now, and just watching her experience the world through her eyes.
mm. And she's already, what, 15, 16 months, already
She
10, 11 countries, somewhere around there.
17, she just turned 17 months, and we just went to Cuba, and that was her 12th country. So
Wow. She's going to have them all checked off by the time you started your first one.
I didn't get to my first country until I was 18. I didn't even have a passport until then. So she's way ahead of me.
Yeah, she's crushing it. I just knowing you and some of your journey, I love the story about Afghanistan going in there. Can you talk about you and John
Yeah,
getting detained for a little bit?
that's right. Yeah. So Afghanistan is another one of my favorite countries. And if my only goal was to get to every country in the world, I would have done it years earlier than when I did, which was last year, because there are too many places like Afghanistan, and I mentioned Russia, that just kept drawing me back over and over again. So I went to Afghanistan 3 times, 3 different occasions. And
Mm,
when the country was taken over by the Taliban, 3 years ago, had to go back afterwards, because what that meant is that now that the war was over, huge areas of the country that were impossible for me to visit in the past were now open, accessible, and safe. Believe it or not, the Taliban brought um, more of a risk-free way to explore Afghanistan, more stability to the country. And there are vast parts in the south and in the west that I wanted to see, including like one archaeological area, like the lost city of Jade, which is where the minaret of Jam, one of the largest ancient minarets, can be found. And so I wanted to go out there and see that, and I wanted to experience Afghanistan. I really enjoy the people, and I wanted to see what life was like under the Taliban. It was terrifying in a way, because I didn't know exactly how the Taliban would receive me as an American tourist. I There weren't many other Americans that had gone before me, but there were a couple, and I knew them, and so I could draw from their experiences. But you can never say with certainty what it's going to be like until you get there. And being that we were just at war with them, um, they could detain me. They could do much worse. So when I got there, we traveled for 10 days around the country: Kandahar, Helmand Province, far west, far south. And on the most part, the experience went pretty well until we got to Kandahar. And then we wanted to meet some Kuchi nomads in their camp. And their chief, the chieftain, immediately called the governor, a Taliban governor, and reported us. He's on the phone when we were there, and he said, "Hey, there's foreigners that want to meet me and have come into the camp. Are you aware of their presence?" And our guide, so I did everything possible to follow all of the Taliban protocols and played by their rules, obviously. And I had a guide, and I even had the tourist minister for their government who was with us. And they were shaking in their boots. They were nervous because they were being summoned by the Taliban governor. Something nobody wants to have happened. And so the coup chieftain, us, we all got into the car, and we had no choice. I mean, we were surrounded by checkpoints, Taliban checkpoints. We can't escape. We have to go in and see what happens. We have to go and meet him. And so this Taliban governor was in an old American Special Forces military base that belongs to them. We went where they patted us down. The first thing they asked us was, "Did you fight for the United States in Afghanistan?" And we said no, which is true. But John said, "Oh, but he's been here 2 other times to Afghanistan," which was a little concerning because then that was before the war, and they might think, yeah, it might audition, right? So, and I told them, I'm like, but yeah, not as a soldier, not. I kept repeating that, and so they brought us to the governor into this room surrounded by Taliban soldiers that were all armed to the teeth with AK-47s and American machine guns, everything that was left that they pilfered. And they were not happy. They did not. We shook hands. We smiled. We tried to do everything possible to get in their good graces, but they looked at us like they wanted death on us. And it looked like a war room, like they were planning a assault. They're all wearing turbans, black turbans, big black beards, and war fatigues. And it was very intimidating. It was about 30 guys in this room.
Yeah.
Down in front of the governor and showed him our permit. He took one glance at it and threw it on the ground. And he said, "You do permission to be here." And this is all through a translator. They brought a Taliban translator who sat before us and said, "You do not have permission to be here. You did not get my permission. You're here illegally." And at that point, my heart is racing. And I'm thinking, okay, we're going to be detained. My guide had actually been detained with some American journalists just a few weeks before us in Kandahar. We knew that, there was a very good chance that we'd be in a jail cell for a while. And they took photos of us. We thought, okay, these might be POW photos or something like that, right? And then they essentially said, "All right, we're going to have to sort this out, and we need you to go talk to some people." And they sent us away with some of the Taliban soldiers to another building. We had to drive to this building, and then one by one, we were questioned or interrogated by different Taliban intelligence officers. And they did a lot of good cop, bad cop kind of stuff. They were all excited to see us. They would line up and look at us from a distance, because I think many of them had never seen an American up close before, so they're kind of excited to see us. And some of them come up and shake our hands. One of them would I remember he showed baby photos on his phone of his newborn daughter, and he was all excited.
Oh, wow.
He was all smiles, and so that was a very encouraging sign. But there was a guy who sat down and talked to us, and he said, "Hey, you guys are being held here because Americans bombed their villages and killed our families. This is why we're keeping you here.
Mm.
And he was very stern, very intimidating. And of course, when we heard that, our guide didn't want to translate that to us, but I could tell by watching his features, his nonverbal gestures, that it wasn't good. And I finally got it out of our guide, and he told us, and that was very scary, right?
Mm.
The same guy later on came back and talked to us again, and then he started to kind of cheer up, or he had a happier countenance about him, and he said, "Do you guys play sports? You know, you look like you're sportsmen." And then he wanted to arm wrestle, and then he started to smile more, and I arm wrestled him, and he was just trying to play mind games with us, you know, which, man, we're doing. And then finally, they made us lunch. They cooked us lunch, and they all sat around, and none of them ate, and they all watched us eating. They were all sort of laughing because that made me really worry too. I'm like, did they do something to the food? Is it poisoned? And it was hard to eat because when you're that nervous, you're not hungry at all. And actually, their food was disgusting too. We had to eat, and we ate
Yeah.
very slow bites. And at one point, one of them even said to us, "What are you worried about? Why aren't you eating more? Like, do you not like the food, or do you not trust us?" And I had to say, like,
I'm a
no,
picky eater. I'm just a picky eater.
like, the food is great. You know, you have to tell them it's great. Thank you so much. And you have to be on, you know, you really have to impress upon them that you're thankful to them, and you want to be friends, and you're being as friendly as possible with them. And
Yeah.
so they dismissed themselves for prayers, and our guide and our driver went and they did prayers too, but they're Shiite and they're not Sunni like the Taliban. So we were worried that the difference in how they pray could also anger them, and that could aggravate the situation. So our the Shiite friends of ours, they stayed in the room, and they prayed separately from them because they have a different way of prayer. And then when the Taliban came back, they said, "Oh, hey, by the way, so we got permission a long time ago to let you guys go, but we wanted you to have lunch. We wanted you to have lunch because we were afraid, you know, we didn't want you to leave hungry. So
Mm.
you're free to go. Thank you for coming to our country, and we really want tourists." And they all lined up and shook our hands one by one. One
That's
hand,
awesome.
one hand shaking one hand in their heart, and the other hand shaking our hands. And
Um,
the one guy who was very intimidating arm wrestled me again. And I let him win,
Did
but
you win? You
I
let him win?
but barely though, because they don't really respect, you know, weakness. So might not, you know, if I let him win too easily.
How did that experience among the many kind of shape your perspective about engaging other cultures? Did you get the sense that more people wanted to connect as you traveled?
God, that experience, and I've known this for a long time. Like, I've visited all kinds of different exotic people around the world, people that are as different from my culture as they come, and the Taliban are very different, right? But you can always find a common ground. You don't have to agree with their core views and beliefs in life, right? But you can find common ground with them. And like with the Taliban, like I talked to one of them about their kids, you know, and we talked about sports. Sports and children are always common ground for just about any culture in the world, and you can always find a way to relate, you know, through lots of different things, you know. And I mean, there's always common ground that can be found, and through that you can sort of build friendships or trust. And I think that helped break the ice a little bit with the Taliban. That has helped break the ice with some of the other tribes I've visited around the world. And
Yeah.
the important thing is not to come into a situation acting like you're elite, that you're superior somehow culturally to them, and you know, talking down to them. I don't know. You got to come with equal footing, and then find a way to, find a topic that you think that you can relate to them with, and it could
Oh,
do
that's good.
wonders. Yeah,
Yeah. I was curious about your trip to Lake Tele.
yeah,
Like, what was that like? For those who don't know, can you explain what that is?
yeah. Lac Tele is a lake in the middle of Central Africa in the Congo rainforest basin. It's in probably one of the biggest wilderness areas within one of the largest rainforests left in the planet. And it's a lake that is maybe about 30 miles across. It's like almost like a perfect circle. It was formed by a meteorite, and there's nothing around it. It's just flat. There's no mountains. There's nothing. There's no elevation around this area. It's a big swamp forest, actually. And in this swamp forest, because it's so remote and has been so little explored, um, well, forever, um, not much is known about the animals that live in this area, except for by the locals, the local tribes that live there. And there is one village that is about 30 miles away or so from this lake and from this swamp forest. And they have always believed in this dinosaur-like creature called the Mokele Mbembe, and they believe it lives in this lake. And it's not just one; it's many. It's like a species, like a new species of dinosaur. And they not only believe that it lives there, they worship it in a way. It's sort of like it's taken on like a godlike sort of quality. And um, they when you go, they also consider themselves like protectors of this Mokele Mbembe being. So I read about this. I thought, okay, there's no information online. There's no, I'm not aware of any like tourist expeditions, but I want to try to make this happen. It was about 4 years ago, right after COVID, and I put together a small team of friends, and we figured it out over the course of maybe 6 months. We wanted to find a dinosaur, obviously, but I knew that, I mean, I like chasing myths, but I also know that, yeah, is there any reality to it? Maybe yes, maybe not, but it's kind of fun to think that there might be, right? Any legend, any myth, it's a little fun to chase them and to think there might be a small chance it could be real, right? But
I'd be second guessing every shadow that I saw pop up out of the water. Like,
well, part of it was just going there, right? The experience of going there.
was that tough for the tribe to get through to go see it? Was that another experience where they're going to hold you up here for
It
a bit?
it was very difficult because um, this tribe, they're not used to seeing foreigners. There aren't many foreigners that go there. There have been some scientific expeditions in the past, but when they do see you, they're very suspicious of your motives, and they also want to make money off of you too. So they have a feast or famine sort of mentality, and being a few tourists, you can't go to a nearby ATM, right? The money that you bring with you is all the money you have, and you have to have enough money to get you not just out of the village, but through the next like 3-4 days of travel, because that's probably how long it takes you to find any more, ATMs.
Yeah.
And um, so it's a difficult kind of trip to put together. And then this village, we had to sit down before the elders, and they had a tribal council. They sat down and they had to have this sort of ceremony where they would ask the Mokele Mbembe, the spirit of the Mokele Mbembe and of the forest, if we were allowed to enter. And they had this ritual, and then throughout the course of the ritual, they would find out what it was that we had to pay, and also how much alcohol we had to give, and we had to bring wine with us, and we also had to give them fish, and yeah, so there was, and they could have said no, and they had a reputation actually for denying foreigners entry
Oh,
into the forest potentially if they didn't like you. So one, you have to appease them. You have to make sure that they know they can trust you. But you also have to settle on on a fee that they're agreeable to, because they are leading you into the forest, and they're porters, and so you have to make it worth their while, and they'll try to charge you a lot, but you have to figure out an agreeable price, but you also have to be respectful and avoid offending them, because they just won't let you into the forest, period, if you do that. Or if they do let you into the forest, they'll just leave you there to die if you offend them. So, and it's very, very remote. And once you're in there, the trails are non-existent. You're completely dependent on this tribe for your life.
So you're using a lot of interpersonal skills to connect, read the room,
Yep,
emotional intelligence.
exactly. And at times it gets very charged. You have some villagers that were yelling, angry. And we were sitting there, we were in these little chairs. We brought them in our canoes, our plastic chairs, and we're surrounded by the whole village. So imagine like there's 200 people surrounded by us, and you have the tribal council sitting in front of us in their chairs that we also brought on the canoes, these little plastic chairs. And so everyone is talking in their language, and our guide didn't even understand what they were saying. And every once in a while you hear someone yelling and screaming, and they're very animated, and we thought, okay, that's not good. And
Did it turn out to be a threat, or was it culturally some of the ways they communicated
there's a
with each other?
combination. There were some villagers that were offended by us, and
Mm.
they wanted us to pay penalties, like when we came back from the forest, we entered the village at nighttime, which is a huge taboo in their culture. But the thing is,
Mm.
one of their chiefs was our guide who led us back into the village at nighttime. And we actually told him, like, we don't, and he brought it up to us that, hey, we should probably camp out in the forest, because if we enter the village at nighttime, it's going to be offensive, or it's a taboo. And we said, okay, that's fine. But then a lot of the other villagers that were with us in our group were angry, because they're like, we don't have enough food. If we go back into the village, we can eat. And then so we thought, okay, can we go back into the village? And this village chief, one of the chiefs, said, okay, yeah, we can go back in there, that's fine. Of course, we thought it was okay, but it wasn't. It really angered the other chiefs in the village and the villagers as a whole. And that's where, yeah, it's like you try to appease some people, but you can't appease them all. I mean, you have to find a
Sure.
balance. And we were just at the mercy of the village at that point. And there are a lot of angry people yelling at us, and it got a little tense.
That ability to read the room, was that a skill that developed the more you traveled?
Definitely, it's something that you fine tune over the years. It can be the difference between life or death, or just a really crappy vacation versus one that is less crappy, I guess. They're all challenging, right? It helps out a lot to be able to read people, and especially people that are from very distant cultures.
Mm.
We share nonverbals. We may not be able to understand each other's language, but we all share one thing, and that's nonverbals. And they may differ slightly, but there's some things that are universal.
You and Dan went to France. Was that last year or the year before?
This year, yeah.
Yeah. Talk to me about the tombs. That was not something I had imagined going to Paris and experiencing.
One thing I like to mention is this. I've been to Paris a few times, but
Mm.
I've seen more of Paris underground than I have above ground. So I love urban exploration, like old historical ruined buildings. I find that kind of experience fascinating, and probably one of the urban exploration meccas of the world is the Paris Catacombs. And there's two types. Well, first, the Paris Catacombs, just so you know, is a labyrinth of tunnels underground that dates back to Roman times, and they were used in some parts for the graveyards in the 1600s in Paris, that at the time were were exploding with bodies, and they were unsanitary. They were running out of places to bury them in the cemeteries, and they had to put them somewhere. The city was in a state of, I guess they just were running out of places for all the bodies in the cemeteries. And so they put them inside the catacombs. Sometimes they would unceremoniously just dig a hole into the catacombs, which is about 100 feet deep, and just dump bodies down into them. Other times they would have monks carry them in a religious procession down into the catacombs. But over the centuries, there have been millions of bodies that have accumulated that were placed down there into the catacombs. And so it's like an underground cemetery. And many of the people that are down there died from the Black Plague, or they were executed during the French Revolution by guillotine. So to go down there, I wanted to go and see the part of the catacombs that is illegal to visit, actually, not the touristy part. There's another part where you have to find, the entrances are all a secret. And I found someone online who knew, was familiar with the catacombs, and I basically hired them to meet me at nighttime, me and Dan and a few other friends, and to take us into a tunnel, a train tunnel that was built by Napoleon. And we crawled through a tiny hole that was barely big enough to fit our shoulders in. And from there, we crawled through tunnels that we had to crouch down in with water halfway up to our waist for the next 8 hours. And we spent all night, and we must have walked miles and miles through underground Paris until we got to it's called an ossuary, where the bones line the ground and are 10, 20 feet deep in parts. And we're crawling in bones. And it was fascinating experience to, very Indiana Jones like.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
How did you find that place? Just a natural tendency to read up on history or connect with some of those obscure type of places in the world?
I don't know so I'm constantly keeping tabs of places that are fascinating and interesting, whether it be from just reading, I rarely use social media like Instagram to find places, right? I tend to find places that I want to go to through travel documentaries, history documentaries, National Geographic, talking to other extreme travelers, or just reading up on the world, or looking at maps, Google Earth. And that's how I usually find the ideas that I have to go to places. And the Paris Catacombs, that is actually a place that I've been wanting to go to for decades, but I was never in Paris long enough to find an illegal guide to take me there. And also, they're very secretive. They're very protective of this area, because one, it's illegal, and two, they don't want others that are not part of their culture. They're kind of a subculture, and they don't want others to come in and invade and sort of desecrate it's a kind of a sacred place to them. So it took me a long time to find someone to finally bring me down there. And it's one of my favorite urban explorations to date.
That's fascinating. I love that. Wow. Props to you for getting there, man. That's awesome. Getting into places, you mentioned that place being illegal. I think of other places like just tough to get into in general, like North Korea. You went to Timbuktu recently,
Yeah.
as well. How do you manage getting into places that are not really common to get into?
Yeah. So one of my favorite things to do is and I beat myself up for this too, because it brings a lot of stress into my life, but I love to find places that are really hard to get to and figure out a way to get there. And North Korea was like that. I went there decades ago, and I was on one of the first American allowed trips into North Korea. That was back in like 2005, 4, something like that. And it was actually quite easy to get into there. once you had all of your permissions in order. Now it's impossible for Americans to go there. It probably will be for some time. That was actually one of my easier trips to arrange. But Timbuktu, the very name sort of rings remoteness, right? And
Yeah.
it's in the middle of the Sahara Desert in the country of Mali. At one time in the 1300s, it was one of the wealthiest cities in the planet. The king is if you take inflation into consideration, the wealthiest man to ever live, worth hundreds of billions of dollars, worth more than Elon Musk. And um, so it was a rich historical empire at the time. And all that remains now is the faded desert city that's half encroached by the sands of the Sahara now in the interior of Mali. And it's surrounded by rebels that are trying to take over that part of Mali and separate from the country. And a lot of those rebels are jihadists, Al Qaeda
Mm.
insurgents, and they have kidnapped foreigners and have murdered foreigners. So there's virtually no tourism in that country now, and hardly any foreigners that go there. It's red listed by the State Department. And Timbuktu, you can't go over land to get there. It's suicide. The only way to get in there is by flying. And even that's difficult because the government is also paranoid of Westerners and anti-foreigners. So, yeah, so I decided, and only a year ago, Al Qaeda actually had laid siege to Timbuktu and was lobbing RPGs and mortars into the airport. And so why did I decide to go there this year? It's a good question. I don't know, but yeah, got there. Me and 8 friends, we got into Timbuktu, and it was an amazing experience. We went there with a bunch of military generals from Mali and ministers, government ministers. So
Mm.
if the best time to go, I guess, in the Timbuktu is when you go with people like that, because with them they probably had about 100 soldiers escorting us and
A
hundreds
lot of
more. And
security.
yeah, so and it was
How,
because there was a festival at the time, and yeah,
how long were you there?
Mali for a week, Timbuktu for a day. We flew in there in
Okay.
the morning. We paid the pilot to wait for us, and the pilot took us back at the end. It was a 737 too, so it was a plane full of people, and they all waited for us.
I mean,
It was either that or wait it out in the city for another few days for the next flight, which may or may not come, and hope you won't get kidnapped.
it's just unreal. It's almost unbelievable. How long have you been on this journey? When did you start?
Got my passport so my first trip was 1995. So I've been doing this now for about 30 years, this kind of
Wow.
extreme adventure, global travel. So it's been about 30 years. And my first trip was to China in 1995. I lived over in Shanghai for 3 months,
Mm.
studying Chinese at a Chinese teaching university. And it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. My earliest travels will always stand out because that was when everything was new and exciting, and I was young and innocent to the world. Every experience was much richer, I think. Plus, the world was much different back then. It wasn't globalized like it is now. It didn't have social media. It didn't have internet. I'd write letters to my parents from China.
World's changed quite a bit.
Yeah, and the people I met were the friendships I had were, I mean, for many of the friends that I made, they had never met another foreigner before, especially an American. And it wasn't long before my trip to China that, we were taught that the Chinese, and just like they were taught that Americans were potential enemies. And then for us to develop these friendships and everything, and it was such a great experience that I'll never forget.
Yeah. What advice, kind of looking back on you pursuing your own goal, what do you think was a principle to it all, a value that really stuck out for you to get to that point that you think would encourage those who are starting out in their own goals?
So for me, I think from the very beginning, I was constantly told, don't do this. It's too dangerous. It's impossible. Essentially do what everybody else does. It's safer, right? And so I was constantly met with limitations and discouraging advice. So I never took that to heart. If anything, it motivated me to continue on my path because I refused to accept criticism. I used that as it had the opposite effect on me. It just encouraged me to keep moving forward, to prove those people wrong. And
that's great.
yeah, and so don't let anything limit you, and just kind of, I would figure out a way. I would prioritize my life so that I could have enough money to travel, and I would make the necessary sacrifices. Didn't have a car for years, because that was expensive, right? And then when I traveled, I would figure out a way to do it very cheaply. I would sleep in Indian train stations. I would bring my tent, camp out, would do whatever it took to travel cheaply. And so I prioritized, I sacrificed, and I always found a way.
I had a guest on recently, and we were talking neuroscience and the idea that when you have a priority, you need habits that are going to support your priority. And it sounds like that's exactly what you were doing, working to make the money, sacrificing certain things, whatever it took to support your priority, that vision, that goal for yourself. That's awesome.
Yeah.
How do people get more information on you? How do they learn more about your trips? I know you got a website with pictures and stories. And
yeah, I've tried to document my travels. It took me decades to finally start the website and to write all my travel stories. So I wrote them very, very post travel, based on my memory. But venturetheplanet.com is where my website is. So you can read up about me and my travels. And I've given travel presentations at different organizations. So if anyone's interested in that, I'm happy to do that. I love talking about traveling, and I love sharing my passion and helping to motivate others to go out and explore. So, and to share stories. So, reach out to me and through my website or through my email is mallison40@yahoo.com.
I'll have those in the show notes as well, so they can reach out to you. And highly recommend doing that. You got some amazing photos. I love the ones in the tombs there in France, and seeing the pictures of Timbuktu, recently. That just, wow. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for doing that. You could have hidden those gems all to yourself, and it's great that you offer that to us. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you connecting, and it was good to see you again. I think I heard Indy in the back. I think she was a little upset that she's not on another trip right now. So get off this podcast and take me on a plane.
No, the thing is that she really loves traveling. Now it's like the moment I put her in the carrier and she knows that she's leaving the house, no matter what kind of bad tantrum she's having, she just cheers right up. And she actually does well on a plane, and she loves traveling. Yeah, she does really. We're blessed that she's like that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's good to see you, my friend, and I appreciate you.
All right. Take
care. All right, my friends. Please go check out his website. Check out his information there. It's a lot of great stuff, and we'll keep fighting the good fight. And until next time, EB out here.